2 Corinthians 4:7 says this, "We now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God and not ourselves." In my daily Bible reading, I recently read of one of the greatest displays of God's power, the contest between Elijah and the 450 prophets of Baal. You know, Israel, just to set the stage, was in a very dark time. They were run by a corrupt king and an even more corrupt and wicked queen. They had abandoned the truth of God and were practicing vile things and even bowing down to false man-made gods. And on top of it, they were in the middle of a 3-year drought, which, by the way, was caused by Elijah's prayers. You could say that he was a very unpopular guy at the time. And so with all that going on, God comes to Elijah and he says, "Go confront the king and challenge him to a contest." So that's what Elijah did. It was the 450 prophets versus Elijah. And here's the rules. Whoever gets their God to show up wins. So we turn out at the contest. All of Israel gathers on top of Mount Carmel, and it's ready for the showdown. The 450 prophets go first, and they put on a spectacular show. They have their fancy altar, and they dance around, even cutting themselves for hours and hours, yet no response. So now it's Elijah's turn. And there was one problem. He didn't even have an altar. The people had torn it down because they didn't practice worship that way anymore. And so he starts by rebuilding his altar with 12 uncut stones, just like the Lord asked him to. He puts his bull on top, and then he digs a trench around the altar and pours water all over the sacrifice, filling the trench. I want you to think about this. The prophets of Baal had the numbers, they had a fancy altar, and they had the popularity of the people. Elijah was all alone. He had a very unremarkable altar, and he was extremely unpopular, probably even more so because he had just poured the rest of the water that they had all over his altar, right? But God showed up. He didn't respond to what the world said mattered. No, he responded to Elijah being completely surrendered in obedience to God. And if you remember the story, Elijah prays, God sends this giant fireball that consumes the altar and the sacrifice on the altar and all the water surrounding it. It was this incredible victory. So today you might feel like Elijah on Mount Carmel, outnumbered and unpopular. You could say you feel like a fragile clay jar. But just as it was then, it is today. And God is ready to display his power through you. All you need to be is surrendered and willing. So today, let's prepare the altar of our hearts and get ready for the great treasure of God to shine through.